3, 2. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Double Digit Hockey Show. I am your host, John Easthope, and you joining the show. Of course, we are here on productions.com. Another great show lined up for you this week. We got ourselves a terrific show, lots of good topics coming, and an amazing guest coming to me today. She is from the Flames. She does the managing managing digital and social for the Flames. But more importantly, according to her Twitter, she is a burrito connoisseur. Torie Peterson joins me on the show today. Torie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. All right, before we get started on all this hockey conversation, I have to ask, burritos. What's your go-to burrito? Where at, and what's your favorite type of burrito?
It's probably a good thing we don't have one in Calgary because I would eat Chipotle every day, like without fail every day. And I'm kind of boring. I do a veggie burrito with tons of hot sauce.
Nice.
So basic, but like you cannot beat a Chipotle burrito.
Yeah, Chipotle is really good. I'm glad we don't have one anywhere close to where I live either. So can get fat real quick eating burritos. So it's awesome. So tell us, what got you into being in the social media, sports media thing, Flames? What drove to this particular field and this particular job for you?
Yeah, so I started out, it was like 13 years ago as an intern with the Flames, a 2-week practicum. I was at SAIT at the time, and back then it was a very basic setup. Like social media wasn't a thing at all, so it was just helping out with the website and writing, anything that I could do there to help out. And then it was only one person at the time working on the website, and he quickly realized that he could use an extra hand. So I stayed on as a contractor after that until I graduated from, ended up being the University of Calgary. And then I just transitioned into a full-time employee. So it's been my only adult job. Nice. And I've been there since the start of social media, which again ages me a lot. But I've seen the evolution and how it's grown, and it's become its own beast in a sense, and that you do need people that are simply dedicated to social media at this point, especially in sports, and given how sports is covered in that landscape. So it's been a unique role, and I'm super grateful for how the timing has worked out for me in that sense, because at that, like I said, I started out helping with website and doing basic writing. So
the job has changed a lot for you from the beginning, as you were talking about just website and into this social media aspect. How do you go about evolving your approach to the job as social media continues to evolve itself into what we see so far today?
That's the cool thing about being in this space, is that it's constantly changing, and you need to constantly keep yourself informed about what's going on in the landscape. What platforms do you think you should be on? Which ones do you think may die off within 6 months to a year? Because there's been plenty of platforms that have died off. Thankfully, we haven't ventured too far into those and put a lot of time and resources into the ones that have gone with the wind. But that is the cool thing. You have to be consistently educating yourself, which I don't know a ton of rules that needs that level of attention to detail when it comes to how platforms are changing and what you can do with it as a brand and as an organization.
You watch the evolution of Twitter, and I use Twitter because that's the one I use a lot, and I have to commend those who run the social media for any sports franchise, especially on Twitter and what Twitter can be. What are the challenges that you face with interaction on Twitter, and how people they think you're the hockey team when you actually don't the hockey team? How weird is that for you?
You get used to it. It sounds weird, but you're able to quickly, if you do this on a day-to-day basis, you quickly learn how to filter out the comments that need replying and the ones that people are just venting into the ether, essentially. They just want to vent. And depending on how a team is doing at any given point in any given season, you know what to expect when you go into your mentions. I read them all, but there are times where you just know, okay, these are people who just need to vent. So we'll just let it be. Sometimes you do need to respond. Other times and I haven't had a ton of experiences where you need to actually mute or block an account. And when that's happened, thankfully, people who aren't Flames fans. It's just people who are out there trolling, which is just an unfortunate thing in social media. And you learn to be able to block that out to a certain extent on a day-to-day basis. As you know, Twitter is an amazing space and an incredibly toxic space all at once. So once you're able to navigate that from a personal and emotional standpoint and go, okay, like I can't take anything personally. This isn't about me. And learn how to block out the trolls. Then it becomes a lot easier. I do feel bad for people who maybe started out in the space and they come into a volatile situation, because it is a lot to manage and sift through and understand even just the general landscape, not your own team or player or whatever it may be, brand, but just the general landscape of Twitter can be really depressing if you let it be. But once you get into the groove of things and understand the space, it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, I love Twitter. It's and I love the haters that come at you on Twitter. It's always fun. I always laugh at those who tweet the Flames account, so and so needs to be on the power play, or why is so and so playing the last 3 minutes of the hockey game? It makes me laugh. So during the course of this pandemic, it's created a lot of interesting and having to be innovated in your coverage of the Flames. What's it been like for you during this last year and a half of covering the Flames during a pandemic, and the challenges that you face every day with this pandemic?
Yeah, well, to start, it was everyone was in the same boat, right? There was a lot of A and B testing with content at that point, because that's all you could do to figure out what people wanted to see. It's such a weird time in the history of the human species, because we're all at home and no one really knows what everyone else wants to see. Should we be producing more content? What kind of content? So there was a ton of testing. We did a ton of different types of content to see what hit and what didn't, and it carried us through the summer until we hit the playoffs. Thankfully, we did get playoffs, and I have to commend the NHL, because that was an incredibly arduous task to pull that together with 2 bubbles. Won a round, and then unfortunately fell out in the second round, but that provided plenty of content for our fans. And then we just shifted into, okay, we're going to treat this like our normal off season. We'll handle it that way. It's just a different time of year. Without a start date in mind, we spread it out a little bit more than we normally would. The draft helps. And covering the draft virtually was actually incredibly seamless. And going into this summer, I think we have a really good framework in place for how to run this draft, given that we did it in October and we figured out where the problem points were in terms of content and what we could have done better. And then once the start of the season rolled around and it became apparent that we probably were not going to have fans at all this season, just given Canada's situation with COVID and how each province was handling it individually. I was in the bubble along with a cameraman as well. Both of us have been with the Flames for over 10 years. It was very easy for us to seamlessly work that in. After the first couple weeks, you get really used to it and the situation that you're in. And every team's bubble coverage is different, because every team has different levels of access, even for those people in the bubble. So for us, it was mostly kind of taking stock of what other teams were doing. Is there anything extra we could be doing within the boundaries that we have set as an organization? And it was a challenging season. There were tons of ups and downs from an on-ice perspective. But from a content perspective, it rolled fairly seamlessly. We didn't have a ton of issues. Both of us know the guys really well just because of the length of time we've been there. So from a staffing standpoint, it was actually easier than one would think. It was, I will say, I was very happy to come out of the bubble, because after 140 plus days in it, it is a bit of an arduous task. But from a content standpoint, it rolled fairly seamlessly. So no complaints there. Very grateful that the NHL was able to work out a season in the first place. There's so many moving parts. And then you add in COVID delays and we had, I think it was almost 2 weeks of a delay to end the season. So just a really unique standpoint and how you cover those games when you have had delays. So yeah, it was a unique season. I'm grateful that we got it done. I don't feel like we ever need to do this again, and I'll be very thankful in the fall when things are hopefully back to normal. So, but yeah, it was good. Unique learning experience.
Absolutely, yeah. I had both Ryan Leslie and Mr. Parker there. We talked about both on my show earlier in the pandemic and things like that, and they were both talking about how they had a unique view being on the concourse and still being able to watch these hockey games live, but with no fans. You were also there during these hockey games and a chance to watch with no fans in the building. How was that experience for you, and how eerie is that Saturday empty, but there's a hockey game going on?
It was. It sounds strange, but it got weirder as time went on. It didn't get less weird. To start, we knew what to expect, right? When you go into the season, you're like, okay, this is going to be really weird. But it was like, okay, I expected this. And as time went on, like by the end of the season, you're like, oh my God, like fans bring, not that I didn't know that fans bring so much to a live game experience, but they bring way more than you would think. It is incredibly silent in some of those rinks. And given wherever we're sitting during a game, you can clearly hear people on the bench talking, and it's not like they're yelling. Like we could hear them talking on the bench. That was weird. So it just presented another reason why, as humans, we're such we need each other, and we need these kind of group experiences because it is just so weird. By the end of it, I'm like, couldn't do another game. Like it just felt weird, and I don't understand. Like for the players, I can't even imagine trying to generate a lot of energy that you normally would get from the crowd from nothing. Because even they had great, I'll say this for all the rinks, they put a ton of effort into putting in the simulated crowd noise, but it is just so different from the actual energy and buzz you get in the building. It's just weird.
Yeah, for sure. I do give a lot of credit to the NHL for how they pulled the season off, for the players showing up, and then we see the playoffs and we see crowds back and those atmospheres back, and then it just becomes jealousy again because we didn't get that in Calgary this season. You had one of the best seats in the house, so to watch this season and maybe talk a little bit about what you saw from the Flames this year, from the team from start to finish. They were able to battle, I guess, through a lot of the adversities that they faced this year. What did you see from the Calgary Flames this year?
Yeah, it was such an up and down season. And I think Elias Lindholm probably phrased it the best in his postseason media availability when he said the highs were way too high and the lows were way too low, especially at the start of the season when it was just that up and down roller coaster. And I truly believe that had this been an 82-game season, they likely would have slid into the playoffs. I think they were really finding their groove in that second half. And having a coaching transition in the middle of the season while trying to make the playoffs is very tough, especially when it's a different style and a different system than they're used to. But by the end of the season, you saw guys getting really comfortable in that system and how they were playing with each other and getting used to each other and playing under Darryl. And I think if they had more time, they probably would have made the playoffs. But that inconsistency to start the season was what really plagued them. You win 1 or 2 games, then you lose 3 or 4. That's just, it's so hard to come back from. And it became really apparent in a 56-game season that consistency is so key. If you want to A, make the playoffs, and B, make a run. I think you're seeing that with the Colorado Avalanche right now. Like they are just, they're flying, but they've been flying for most of the year. Like there hasn't been a lot of ups and downs in their games. They're very stable, very consistent. And I think you saw the potential that this group has at the tail end of the season, and that gives you a lot of optimism heading into next fall.
It was a very up and down season, and then the Flames made that coaching change, as you mentioned. So Darryl Sutter comes in with his no-nonsense approach. He's kind of an old skunker still. We know what to expect from Sutter. Dealing with Sutter can be a little bit different on the media side. First off, how did you find the coaching change and how that affected the team? And then maybe a little bit of how it is to deal with Sutter being a media member.
Yeah, the team responded well. It's just that when you have different structures and different systems and different ways of practicing and a different philosophy, essentially, it's going to take some time for guys to adjust. I think you really saw how well at the tail end, like Johnny was flying once he adjusted. I think that system really works well for him in terms of point production, in particular. But as I don't want to call myself a media member in the sense that this season I was behind the scenes and I worked with Darryl a lot. And Darryl has been incredibly kind and really, really considerate of all the staff in the bubble. He was just very great to Andrew, our cameraman, and myself. So I have nothing but positives to say about Darryl. I feel like his media availabilities are going to be some of our top viewed videos, just because you never know what you're going to get, especially the Zooms. So that's an interesting thing to watch. And the Darrylisms, just the random quotes that he'll come up are amazing. Like it was hard to formulate a lot of different and new content on the fly this year, just because of how separate our staff is. One of us in the bubble, other people working from home, other people at the Dome for games. It was a challenge, but I think there's some really fun stuff we can do with Darryl going forward, and that's what we're looking forward to. But as a staff member, Darryl has been incredibly kind and nothing but good things to say about him.
I have a theory that Sutter secretly likes dealing with the media and being on camera. I think he enjoys the spotlight and being there. I think he just likes to play it up. I love Darryl Sutter and what he does in the media. You mentioned Johnny Gaudreau there, and he's one of a few guys that really, I think, had a resurgence under Sutter. Once they figured out how he wanted them to play, and they figured out how they can perform under Sutter, they kind of had a rejuvenated start of the season. And then Gaudreau goes on to talk about how he wants to be in Calgary. So let's have the Johnny Gaudreau conversation. You've dealt with him for a few years since he's here. Your interactions with Johnny Gaudreau, and what do you make of his future in Calgary?
Yeah, I don't understand the narrative, and I don't think it's most fans and media, to be honest. I feel like it's just a smaller group that may be louder than the majority, but I don't understand the weird push for Johnny not being in Calgary. I've never understood that. He's never said that. He's always been very adamant that he loves the city. It's basically his second home now, right? Like, he's been here since he was a kid. And his family loves the city. Like, they love the fan base. They love the team. It just seems very weird to me that there's this weird push to create that narrative around a certain player who is given zero indication ever of wanting to leave. So I find it odd, but I understand that narratives drive media. So, but as an individual, I do find it weird.
What about Johnny Gaudreau's dad? He has his own gifts now out there. His own memes are out there in Flames Nation. You've had to interact with Johnny's dad a little bit. Tell us a little bit about him and what helps him drive his son to be a better hockey player.
Yeah, well, he's the one who got Johnny into hockey, and he's been instrumental in developing hockey in that region of New Jersey. They're just outside of Philadelphia, but they're in New Jersey. And when you talk to people, we've had the privilege of covering Johnny's charity golf tournament there. And when you're starting to chat with people who knows the family, and they're going, like, this family basically developed minor hockey in this area, and it's been his passion his entire life. As a coach and making sure that the game is accessible to people in that region and really developing it. I don't think it's a surprise at how both of his sons who played hockey are now playing at a professional level, given his passion for the game and his drive to continue to grow the game. So that's pretty cool to see. Like, they're very much a hockey family. So being able, he's a great guy. The whole family is great. Like, nothing but good to say about them. Very welcoming. They love the city. They love coming and watching Johnny here. And to see them still now, like, their son's, I think he's 27 now. He's late 20s. He's he's been to several All-Star weekends, and he's taken part in a lot of different events, and they still want to come and watch their son and cheer on their son. And that's cool. That like, it's never lost the appeal. Like they're there to support John. And I think that's really cool to see. Not saying most parents aren't like that, but when your kid is a superstar, at some point, maybe you go, I need the weekend, I need to do this weekend. I can't come and watch play. But no, they watch every game, no matter the time difference. They go to special events. Like it's just a really cool thing to see.
My favorite thing about Papa Gaudreau there is when you have those dad weekends or those dad trips and how he lives and dies with the play like a normal fan would do. It's just incredible to watch and how he interacts with the whole, and has like a father figure to the whole team. I wanted to bring him up and have a chance to talk about him a little bit as well. So the question is galvanizing, and so we'll move on from it a little bit here. And I want to talk about Gaudreau's good friend. Sean Monahan had a bit of a tough season, but he had that the Flames can rely on to score goals. But he played through some injuries this past season. Maybe a little bit about what you saw from Sean Monahan. And for me, he's the biggest candidate for a bounce back next year. What can we possibly see from Sean going ahead in the future here for him?
Yeah, when you battle through injuries, and people didn't know that at the time, obviously, and you're trying to push your team into the playoffs, that's really difficult for any player, especially a guy who relies on himself to score goals. Like that is his bread and butter. He scores goals. He has his entire career since he was in junior. So when you're not scoring, that does weigh on you pretty heavily as an individual, even if you are battling injuries and you know, hey, like I'm not at my peak performance here because I'm hurt. So I see that as a very, very good prediction for next year as a bounce back. This is a guy who can easily put up 30 to 40 goals in an 82-game season, especially power play. Like he's so clutch when it comes to scoring those goals in tight. So I'm expecting a pretty big year from Sean. And I think like the team shut him down and got the surgery done quickly so that he had all season to recover. I think that's probably the smartest thing you can do for a guy you're going to rely on to score a lot of goals. Give him the time for his body to fully rest and recover and not have any lingering issues, and have him prepared and ready to go when he's back in Calgary in September. It's just unfortunate, right? Like you see a lot of players, I think, in that age group battle injuries more and more. Like you saw it with Michael Backlund when he was younger. He battled injuries a lot every season until his body kind of settled into where it is now, and he trains a certain way to ensure that he's healthy most of the time, barring any freak accidents. So I think as you develop as a player, you learn how to best prepare yourself for a season in the off season. And in that age group, you might be pushing really hard. That's not an individual case with Sean. I just think that age group, you're trying to be so good all the time that you might push yourself a little bit too hard in training, and it can lead to longer complications. So, but I do see Sean as probably your number one candidate for a bounce back year.
Yeah, I've done on multiple shows that I've done about Sean Monahan. I stick up for the guy a lot because he took a bad rap on social media all season long. A little bit of a down year for him. Expect him to bounce back next year. I don't want to sound too negative with this next one, so I'm going to try to go about it in a positive way. Matthew Tkachuk had what I'm going to call a challenging year. He wasn't himself for a good portion of this, whatever that reason might be. But what did you see from Matthew Tkachuk? Because he needs to be that energy player for this team. He needs to be the energy guy to push the team forward. What did you see from Tkachuk? And is he better than what he's shown, or is there more to his game that we haven't yet for you?
Yeah, I definitely think that's another guy that you could qualify as likely having a bounce back year next year. That's a guy who feeds on emotion and energy. And I think you saw it across the league. A lot of players who feed on crowds, whether it be a hostile opposition crowd or your home fan base cheering you on, they derive a lot of their energy from that. And you saw it across the league. Some players I think that does weigh on a player when you don't have that kind of buzz and energy from a crowd. He's been very vocal that he didn't think he was good enough this year. He could have been better. And this is a kid who's always been driven. And I think when you have a year like he did where he was not satisfied with his own play throughout the season, you're going to see him come into next season even more committed to being that difference maker, because he has been a difference maker his entire career from juniors on. Like, he's just been that guy, and he depends on himself to be that guy for a team. So when you have a year where you're not happy, I think your commitment level to being that difference maker just skyrockets the next year. And I think with crowds back in the buildings, it'll help every player, don't get me wrong, but guys who play with that kind of emotional edge to their game, it'll make all the world of difference next year.
I think that's a very good point you brought up there, that it's across the league. It wasn't just Matthew Tkachuk. Guys that feed off the crowd we're lacking a little bit game this year, and so expectations going into next year should go back to normal for me for these type of players, with crowds hopefully being back in most capacities here. We should expect to see a good bounce back from these type of players. That's a very good point that you brought up there, and I appreciate those thoughts. The Flames back end have been a big conversation on social media. What do you do, Giordano? What is Chris Tanev? What about Anderson, Hanifin? All these type of things. Overall, what did you make of the Flames defense this past season? And then going forward here, do you see very many changes coming for the Flames on the back end, or do you think that they're set going forward?
Well, to be honest with you, I've seen how many Canucks games in my career, but honestly, I never really paid much attention to Chris Tanev until he came here. Because, he's kind of, you don't need to pay attention to a guy who's a steady stay-at-home defenseman unless he's on your team and you're appreciating what he brings to the table. So I think Chris Tanev was a bit of a revelation for myself and a lot of Flames fans who were probably looking at that and going, why did they sign this guy? Like, what does he bring to the table? It's very clear what he brings to the table now. He is such a stabilizer on the back end, and I think when we're talking about potential changes or what the blue line looks like next year, I think you're looking at a guy who, no matter who he's paired with, he's going to make better and get them to the next level. Now, him and Giordano were incredible down the stretch. I think Mark Giordano had a very strong second half and doesn't get the credit he needs for that after an up and down start to the season for everyone. But I think if you're going to look at what Chris Tanev brings to that back end, like, you could pair him with any young defenseman, I think, and that young defenseman is going to take another step in his game. You saw it with Noah Hanifin, and when Noah was not paired with Chris after that, he was still incredibly solid before that injury, which was unfortunate. Another thing we don't talk a lot about, but they lost Noah Hanifin, who was playing a ton of minutes for them and contributing a lot. That's a big loss for a blue line, especially when it happens when you're pushing for the playoffs. They weren't out of it then. Like, that was just an unfortunate timed injury that I think really hurt them going down the stretch, because you didn't have him there. I expect Noah to have another really strong year. I think he developed so much with Chris and really found areas that he can contribute. He's always been a strong skater, but you really saw his game evolve in terms of what he can do. I think he has more offensively he can give. I think Tanev might have more offensively that he could give. He just doesn't shoot a lot, but he has a hard shot. So you might see a little more offense from that back end. But I think when you're looking going forward, you're going to see the younger guys take a step. I know Rasmus, he was very adamant about this as well in his postseason availability, but he wasn't happy with his play all year. And he took that to heart. And I think heading in next season, you'll see a more stable Rasmus Anderson, because he was up and down throughout the season, which he said. And I think that's something you can look forward to. Like Matthew, very driven, and not having the season he would have liked is a huge motivating factor for him. He's also going to become a father, I believe, in late summer. So he's got some life changes coming up too. Become a dad for the first time. So they're like, you're looking at guys who are going through significant life changes off the ice as well. In terms of that, like, I don't know, people don't like to take that into account, but these guys have lives off the ice, and if you're dealing with something, if it's good or bad, a major change in your life is going to affect your play to a certain extent. So I'm looking forward to seeing Rasmus next year. I think we've seen over the years what he was developing into and how strong of a defender he can be. I think now that he understands the system and what Darryl's looking for, I think he's a pretty strong contender as well for having a bit of more stable season next year. So, but yeah, I think the biggest thing, and not just for me, for the fan base, was like, oh my God, Chris Tanev is a hell of a defenseman. And how did I not know this before now? Because like he is incredibly solid. And I think the other thing I think was shifting up is Michael Stone. Michael Stone didn't play for a year, comes into the lineup and seamlessly integrates himself. And that's a guy who
he was good.
Props in the world to, because that's a hard thing to do, and he did it without complaint. And he was a true soldier in terms of went to practices every day, skated, and when they needed him, he just slid right in there.
The Chris Tanev conversation was awesome for me because I had Peter Lombardius on before the season began, right after they signed Chris Tanev, and I asked Peter to sell me on Chris Tanev because I was one of those that are like, well, I don't understand this contract. And the biggest thing he told me, he's like, watch the guy without the puck and you'll understand. And you watch Chris Tanev without the puck and you understand what his game is all about. And then, of course, that bleeds over to his defensive partners as well. As you pointed out, they're both Giordano and Hanifin. It's amazing. One defenseman we haven't touched on, though, was Juuso Välimäki. The season for him was up and down. It was definitely a learning experience for him, especially under Sutter. What are fair expectations for you for the young defenseman going into the next season?
I think this season is probably it's challenging when you're in the middle of it, in the grit and the grind of it. But I think this is a kid who's proven he is extremely committed to being as good as he can be. And he's had some really unfortunate injuries early on in his career. Luckily to get back in and play in Finland to start the year, I think was incredibly beneficial coming into the year. And then now you're seeing him, we're going to call it a full NHL season in, and he's starting to really understand the rigors and what it takes to be an everyday NHLer. He's so young. I think people forget that. He's really young. And he's such a polite and really cerebral young man. It's interesting to watch him work and figure out how he can fit in the NHL and what he can do best and what he can offer a team. And he's going to go through ups and downs like any young player. I don't think this year was like some kind of huge knock on him as a player. He's just figuring out especially the pace he needs to play at to be a top 4 defenseman in this league. And the coaching staff have worked with him on that as well to make sure he understands how he best fits in this lineup and what he can do to really, solidify himself as an everyday NHLer. But at the end of the day, he's so young. And I think this offseason will be really good for him. You go home, you go to Finland, you work out, you put in the reps you need to, because you know what's expected of you going into next season. With a coaching change, that can be difficult to learn on the fly. But after a half a season under a new coach, you know what they expect and you know what you need to do heading into next season. So this gives him some time to really mentally reset, recover, and get physically prepared for the next season after, like I said, the injury. It was just so unfortunate for him. One thing after another. Now that he's fully healthy and knows what he needs to do with this coaching staff, I think he's going to be just fine.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the player. You mentioned it there, his mental, recovery and stuff. I think that's a big part of his game going forward, is getting over hurdles of the injuries that he had, learning the experience of this season and going forward. I expect big things from him next year. The big talk around the team right now is changes have to be made. That's the fan base, clamoring for changes. Pitchforks are out for certain players and things. For you, if there are changes to be made, what is the biggest thing that the Flames are missing in their team here?
Well, I don't think it's any secret that they would have liked to score more goals. I think if you're looking to next season and you're looking at where you want to create change and where you need to shift your game, I don't think anyone would say that they were happy with the amount of goals scored. Depending on the night, some nights goals came easy, some nights they were very difficult to come by. So I think goal scoring is obviously you win games by scoring more goals than the other team. So the goal scoring is a I think, an area where you'll probably see some change. Most teams obviously want to add another goal scorer or two, or find a player in their system who can contribute that way. And I think there's a lot of talk around like, well, what's in the Flames prospect system? There's some guys who can score goals, and depending on where they're at in their development, you might not need to go external. You might have them right there in your backyard and bring them in. And if they can fit in the system and play at a high pace that Darryl expects, then you might have that answer already. But I think looking at the top six, you'd want some more goals, production out of them. And all of the guys who played in a top six role this year would say the same thing. They wanted to score more. They wanted to produce more. The offense wasn't where they wanted it. You saw that top line at the end of the season, though, producing fairly consistently. And you saw the resurgence of Johnny from the start of the season. And I think Matthew really benefited from that. And I think Elias probably – he is so stable, and there's no knock on him, but I think he can produce more, especially now that they've kind of figured out that they can all play together and the style they play together. But yeah, I would say you're looking at goal scoring, right? I think goaltending will even itself out too. I think Jacob Markstrom was incredibly good this year. He played a lot of games, but there are games that he was very adamant that he would have liked back, goals he would have liked back. But I think now that what a challenging time for a player to come into a new system, a new team, have a coaching change while living in a bubble. Like, that's a pretty big change. I think Markstrom performed immensely well given the transition from where he was to a new city, a new team, a new coach, two new coaches. And looking at the bubble, I think he did incredibly well. But I think Jacob Markstrom is you don't have anything to worry about in goal. So if I'm going to look at that question overall, I'll say goal scoring.
It's good answer there. Hope Markstrom likes to play because he's going to play a heck of a lot coming next season is too. Sutter likes to ride his goaltenders. You spoke about goal scoring, and that reminds me of a guy that I forgot to bring up when we were talking about individual players earlier in the show here. A guy who led the team now the last couple of seasons in even strength goal. Andrew Mangiapane has blossomed into this incredible top six forward, a guy who can score, and a guy who I think deserves more power play and special teams play. Maybe a word of what you've seen from Andrew Mangiapane this past season, and then now he's doing it at the World Championships with Team Canada. Yeah,
Mange is just he is such a workhorse. He never stops buzzing around, which every coach likes to see. But he's always had that skill and that knack for scoring goals and producing offense. And he's not afraid, as you've seen, to mix it up and get in the quote-unquote dirty areas of the ice. Despite being a smaller guy, he has no problem throwing his weight around. But I think what you've seen from Mange from the start of his career to now makes total sense when you've watched him from junior to today. He's always been that type of player, very dependable. And the one thing that I don't think people talk about enough is his hockey sense. He reads the ice incredibly well. He understands exactly where he needs to be to contribute, and he never stops moving his feet. So he's always moving. He's always where he needs to be, and he reads plays so well. And like you said, I think special teams time on both the penalty kill and the power play will come more and more for him as he develops. He's still a young guy, so there's going to be more growth in his game, which is really cool to see, because this is a guy who's probably not known outside of Calgary. Like, Calgary fans kind of have a hidden gem in there that only we know about, because he's not a big name. But I think he's going to become a bigger name, because this is a guy who's the work ethic, the hockey sense, the offensive ability is all going to lend itself to continuing progression. And I think the sky's the limit for Mange. And he's a guy who you can kind of put anywhere in the lineup too if they need a spark. He's the guy that you put out there to help spark some guys if they're having a rough go of it. He's just a guy who makes everyone better around him. And for me, I think a lot of that is very similar to, they play different games in different positions, but very similar to Michael Backlund in the sense that he can go on a line and change the momentum with that line because of how much he can elevate his line mates' play and their game. Like, he's such a boost to any line and the team that I think it's really cool to see how he went from a guy who wasn't even drafted in the OHL, was passed over in his first draft year, is drafted in the 6th round somehow when he's finally drafted to look where he is now. Like that's a hell of a story of perseverance right there.
Absolutely. The Flames' later round drafting has been incredible while here, finding guys like Andrew Mangiapane. The guy plays like he drinks like 7 Red Bulls before the puck even drops. He just never stops. It's incredible to watch. I've told people on social media, and hopefully I'm not wrong here, that you are dialed in on Flame prospects as well. So there's a couple of guys I wanted to ask you about. If you have some thoughts on these guys, and there's guys, we'll talk about Godin and Phillips and those type of guys, and Ruzicka, but you talk about guys who can score goals. Who are those guys you're talking about? And maybe a little bit about what you've seen from the Stockton Heat this past season. Even, they're in Calgary this year, not Stockton, but maybe a little bit what you saw from those players and how they were developing.
Yeah, I think, you saw what Connor Zary did in his short stint there before the WHL started up again. He went to Kamloops and then continued to just score at just an absolute rapid pace. And I see Connor as like a guy who is going to be a heavy offensive contributor for years going forward. Plays really well, a very smart guy. You saw how quickly he transitions to pro, which obviously is a huge thing. And then you saw some guys take a pretty big step this year in their development in Adam Ruzicka, big-bodied center who can skate. And then making his NHL debut was very cool. Matthew Phillips has always been a point producer. Trying to figure out how he can best contribute at the pro level, especially at the NHL level, I think is going to be key for him next year because he's been a very, very consistent point producer for them since turning pro. Dmitry Zavgorodny is really intriguing to me. Very slow start to the season at figuring out how he could play there and produce, but he really came on in the second half, and you're seeing him learn how he can play pro and how to play pro, the rigors that comes with being in the AHL compared to the Q. There is a very big difference, and the level of competition is obviously very much a step above. So once he figured that out, as many young players do, you saw him take that step. That's very encouraging. And then I think Matthias Emilio Peterson is a really intriguing player for myself because he is so smart. The hockey sense is just another level. He reminds me of Andrew Mangiapane, not in the sense of his playing style. He's a little bit less gritty, maybe a bit more finesse in terms of his game, especially this first pro year. But the hockey sense and understanding very quickly how to play the pro game from the NCAA was really impressive. And you're seeing him now playing against men at the Worlds and figuring that out. And Norway's roster is not a heavy roster in any way, shape, or form. But he's been able to land himself a top 6 role there, which is impressive because he's young. He's very young. So I think he's a really intriguing case. And his ability to be a playmaker, I think, is what you're going to see more at a pro level from Matthias or Emilio, if you want to call him that. The two names throw me off. If you want to, Emilio provides a really strong playmaking presence that I think will serve him well going forward. So those guys for me, and Jacob Pelche hasn't played a pro game yet. I think that is one to watch. Like I think Pelche is a Darryl Sutter type of player. Like that is a kid who is going to thrive under that system. He is like Mange in the sense that he is nonstop energy, go, 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 and obviously has the offensive talent to produce. Particularly, you've seen it throughout junior. He's been incredibly successful with offense throughout his junior career in the Q. So I'm really intrigued to watch him play pro because I think there is so much talent there. And also he's a natural born leader, similar to a lot of different players in making his, that we've talked about, making his line mates better and his team better. You saw that at the World Juniors, when the team loses, he's the guy on the ice hugging every single one of his teammates and consoling them. Like that for a 19-year-old is a level of maturity you don't normally see. So I think Flames fans will be really impressed with Pelche when he makes that leap and turns pro.
Does Pelche have enough in his game to make the jump to the NHL next year, or is he the type of guy that you think would benefit from a year or two in the AHL?
It's so hard to gauge because this season was so weird in terms of the limited number of games played. And then in the queue, they often had to take a few breaks because of COVID protocols. So there was extended periods without games. I think that there's potential there. But like most players, the AHL, I don't think it's a knock on a young player to go and play in the AHL. I think it's an excellent stepping stone. And I think it gives them an area to develop their game against pros and against grown men, because that is a huge step forward. You're playing against guys who now are 50, 60 pounds heavier than your usual competition in some cases. And I think it's a really good spot for a young player to go and learn the game at a pro level without the pressure. Because if you're coming in and you make an NHL roster, there's a lot of pressure there. It's just natural, right? You've taken the step from junior to the NHL. Like, not a lot of players can do that. There's pressure with that. The AHL gives you a really incredible development zone without the level of pressure that goes from, I have to make this NHL roster, and once I do, I have to stay here. There's just a lot of pressure with that. So I think he has the potential, just given his natural skill set. But I don't think it's a bad thing if he spends time in the AHL. I think a lot of people look at first-round draft picks and think they should just make the leap no matter what. But oftentimes that time in the AHL is what does them the most good.
AHL is a great league. Just ask Dylan Dubé and what it's done for his game and how he now has blossomed. I see that very similar for Jacob Pelche myself. There's two guys I want to ask about in particular. I'm not sure how much or in depth you are on these guys, but Martin Pospisil has always been a prospect that has intrigued me. Where are we at with him and his stepping into the Flames, maybe at the Flames lineup? And then a guy they signed out of college in Colton Pullman, maybe a little bit about the young defenseman, what you've seen from him so far.
Yeah, Martin, just an unfortunate end to his season with that knee injury. That was brutal for him, because I think he really had found his game. Like, he was really starting to thrive at the pro level. And that's a guy that wouldn't have shocked me had gotten a call up had he been healthy. Like, a big body, absolutely fearless. Like, there's not an ounce of fear in his body. Like, he will go anywhere and face off against anyone. And there is some offensive upside there, as you saw in both the AHL and then his junior days in the USHL. I just feel bad for how his season ended. It's just a rough go when it's that quick, and you probably had hopes of getting that NHL call. But I like his upside. I think that's a guy who is definitely an energy booster, and can come in and provide that spark that coaches love to see, just with the pure, absolutely unbottled energy he can bring. So I'm hoping next season, knock on wood, stay healthy and hopefully get that chance, because he's a guy, like you said, he's intriguing. His game is intriguing. He's probably more of a bottom six type player. Looking forward, you're not looking at a guy who's going to score 50 or anything like that. And he's very upfront about that. But he's a guy who can come in and be that responsible spark plug. That's the other thing. I thought his game took a big leap in terms of his responsibility level. There was not a lot of defensive lapses. He was always back checking, really strong in the neutral zone. So for him, I think he has a pretty good chance of earning that call up, hopefully in the next season, and knock on wood, stay healthy. And then Pullman is a guy who didn't get a ton of spotlight this year. He's more of a stay-at-home defenseman. At least he has been for the Heat, what I've seen. But he's a guy who I think this shortened season probably did a pretty good job in showing him what he needs to do to be a pro. I thought he was very responsible defensively. There wasn't a lot of lapses in his game, but you need that time to figure out what the pro game is. And I think by the end of the season, you saw him really kind of settle into his role with the Heat.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm looking forward to watching him next season. I think that there is some intrigue there in terms of, is there a potential fit to be that kind of shutdown guy at the next level? And I think he has the skill to do that.
Both those guys intrigue me very much because they seem like guys that you could put on the bottom end of your roster and they wouldn't seem lost. They would seem to be that kind of guy that could fill out your roster there and be that 12th, 13th forward or that 6th, 7th defenseman. Interesting prospects there. So I appreciate you there, not making a liar out of me and knowing your prospects. So I appreciate that part. Let's talk about something a little bit different now. The neighbors to our north here, they had themselves a playoff run, if you want to call it that. They were swept. What happened in your eyes, Oilers, and why did they get swept? And then on the other side, the Winnipeg Jets seem to have found their game. They were struggling at the end of the season and found their game. What was the difference for you in that series?
Oh, from that series was really interesting because, well, 3 of the games went to overtime, which does show you that it was close. I don't think the sky is falling if you're an Oilers fan. They were close games. The Winnipeg Jets just are able to roll 4 lines so incredibly consistently where you almost don't notice the difference between lines. Like that forward depth is quite strong. And I think was the difference there, their forward depth. Like you do have the best player in the world in Connor McDavid there, but the forward depth with the Winnipeg Jets is just consistent. All 4 lines are contributing. They play the same way. They're able to just roll them evenly almost at most points in a game. And I think goaltending too, like Connor Hellebuck is an incredible goaltender. I don't think anyone's disputing that. And he was able to make saves when he needed to keep his team in it and eventually win that series in 4 games. Not that Mike Smith was bad by any means, but Connor Hellebuck made a few more saves that he needed to comparatively. So when you look at that series, it came down to me, forward depth and goaltending. And Leon Draisaitl as well. Like you have 2 of the best players in the world. Like you're not, the sky isn't falling there. It just felt like a bit of a mismatch when it came to, especially your bottom 6. It was different. And the Winnipeg Jets play a heavy game. Like they do play a playoff type game, and they always have. That's just how they roll. They're a bigger team. They have no problem throwing the body around. So, not that was a huge difference maker, but when you look at them, they're the stereotypical built for the playoffs type team. So, but I don't think if you're an Oilers fan, you should, absolutely full on panic. You've got some pretty good pieces in Edmonton.
They do, and you said it there. I don't think Mike Smith was the problem either on that team. I just think the lack of depth was the reason that they were able to beat Winnipeg. But give credit to Winnipeg. They used their depth. They were able to get by the Edmonton Oilers. Now the next question for them is, do they have enough to get by the Leafs or the Habs, whoever wins Game 7 tonight? Do they have to win round 2 as well, or are they going to be up and tough against those guys?
I don't think you should count Winnipeg out. I think, especially if it's Toronto, there's a lot of people who have written Winnipeg off because Toronto's a very good team. Don't get me wrong, but I think the Winnipeg Jets are well coached. They run a balanced lineup, and if their goaltender is at his Vezina peak, like they're a hard team to beat. So I don't think that it's just going to be some runaway for Toronto if Toronto ends up winning Game 7. Montreal is one of those feisty teams that I find them really fun to watch because who had them pushing the Toronto Maple Leafs to go to 7 games? Not a lot of people.
Yeah.
But like Carey Price, again, goaltending. Like when Carey Price is at his peak, like he is incredibly difficult to beat. And they have some really interesting pieces in that Montreal lineup who can score. Like they have depth. They have more depth than people give them credit for. So I honestly don't even have a prediction for Game 7 because I think when you're Toronto and you were up in that series the way they were, you might be a little bit fragile. So, like, Montreal has no pressure on them, really. Like, yeah, of course they want to win Game 7, but they weren't the number 1 seed and they didn't have a significant lead in that series. So, I find Montreal, like, they're fun to watch. So, just given that feistiness that they bring, and Carey Price, when he's playing at his peak, like he's just an absolute joy to watch. So But I don't think I think Winnipeg could take the second round, either team that they're playing. I don't think the parity now in the division is incredible. I don't count any team out. Even like you look at the Ottawa Senators, they had not an optimal start to their season, but the second half of their season, if they had played like that, they could have been a playoff team. Like there's parity in this division. So I'm looking forward to watching round 2.
Me too, yeah. I won't ask you to make a Game 7 prediction. This will air after that Game 7's played, so we'll both look like fools if we make the wrong prediction. So we won't go that far in that. But I think Winnipeg, whoever they play up against in round 2, is going to be a heck of a series, and it's going to be fun to watch. Round 2 is underway, though, in the States. We saw the Avalanche absolutely beat the tails off of Vegas last night. We've seen the Bruins win their Game 1, and we saw a really good game between the Lightning and the Canes. Of these round 2 series, which one for you is hopping off at the beginning here as the one that you're most paying attention to?
Well, I mean, Colorado, they just rolled that first game. Nathan McKinnon looks like he's on another level, which I didn't know he could get to another level because he's a very good player, one of the best in the world, and he's somehow now elevated his game. So that one is intriguing to see if Vegas can bounce back, because that's a hard way to start a series. I've always enjoyed watching the Carolina Hurricanes, so that is probably the series I'm most interested in, because they're pretty even, and you saw it like a 2-1 Game 1, like they're pretty evenly matched. And they're fun to watch. Like they've got some really interesting players in terms of personalities. So for me, it's the Carolina Tampa matchup that I'm probably most interested in and keeping tabs on. I think that I speak for a lot of people in Canada, and that I didn't pay a ton of attention to American teams this year because we weren't playing them. Like I knew all about Canadian teams. I watched a lot of Canadian games. I didn't watch American games just because I was either working or watching another Canadian matchup. So it's kind of interesting now to watch them in the playoffs because I'm like, oh my God, player been doing this all season? What's this guy been doing? Like, has he been like this all year? I have no idea. It's like a nice, fun, interesting, surprise. So, but yeah, Colorado is. I'm more intrigued to see how Vegas responds in that series. But number one, Carolina Tampa, I think is going to be fun to watch, and I think that goes to 7 games.
Elliot Friedman said it best. We're talking about just watching these Canadian teams, where he used to say that it feels weird covering a 7-team league, because that's what it felt like he was doing for a while there, was just covering a 7-team league. And I agree with him. I went out of my way to watch some of these American teams, so I watching in the playoffs when it got this far. And I agree with you. This Lightning Carolina matchup is very intriguing, but I'm very intrigued to how Nathan McKinnon, if he can continue to run all over top of Vegas, they're very interesting there. We're up against time here, so I won't keep you too much longer, but I have one final question for you. This offseason, this league is going to get a 32nd team. There's going to be the expansion draft. What's your level of excitement to see the Seattle Kraken join the NHL?
Oh, it is so high, especially given that we'll be playing against them regularly. I love that. I just think as a franchise, they've knocked this out of the park in terms of understanding their market and their branding. I think like the logo is incredible. The name is incredible. They've just done such a spectacular job of building up excitement and teaching the city about hockey. Because there are plenty of hockey fans in Seattle, but they also want the whole city to embrace the team, which is awesome. So they're teaching people about hockey as they're evolving their brand and prepping for their first season. I think the staff there has done an incredible job, and that arena is going to be beautiful. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I know their number one rival is going to be the Vancouver Canucks, but I'm pretty excited to play them fairly regularly. So.
2 expansion teams in the Flames division next year. It's going to be very exciting to watch how they play and how that works out. Torie, I really appreciate your time today and your insights on Flames and around the National Hockey League. I appreciate your time and setting it aside for me. And it's special for me because this is, truth be told, this is the first female guest I've had on my show, and it's been better than I thought it would have been. And got to get more of you ladies on the show because you're amazing at what you do and the job that you do. So I appreciate you, Torie. Appreciate your time today, and thank you for your insights.
Oh, thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Thank you. And that'll do it for another edition of the Double Digit Hockey Show here on ASTV Productions. Don't forget you can find me on social media at VintageJohnny84. Give me your comments, give me your questions, and we'll see you guys next time here on the show. Thank you very much. Have yourself a good afternoon.